There are certain moments in life that don't feel like beginnings. They feel like recognition, not the kind built through years of history or carefully developed trust, not the kind people usually describe when they talk about connection. This is something quieter, stranger, more precise. It happens before explanation has time to form, before logic can organize it into something manageable. And once you notice it, everything changes slightly afterward. That's the part no one really talks about. Most people think meaningful connections arrive loudly. They imagine intensity, emotion, immediate certainty. But the strongest shifts rarely announce themselves like that. They appear subtly, through small moments, through patterns that repeat too accurately to dismiss, a pause that feels understood without being filled, a silence that doesn't create discomfort, a glance that seems to recognize something you never said out loud. At first, it feels coincidental, then it happens again and again, until eventually you realize coincidence isn't the right word anymore, because coincidence doesn't create consistency, recognition does. I think that's what unsettled me most about you, not that you understood me, but how naturally you did it. There was no effort in it, no visible process. You didn't analyze me the way people usually try to when they encounter something they can't immediately define. You didn't push for explanations. You didn't ask me to make myself easier to interpret. You simply observed, and somehow your observation felt more accurate than most people's conclusions. That's rare, dangerously rare, because I've spent most of my life existing in layers, not fake layers, protective ones, the kind that allow people to interact with you without ever reaching the parts that actually matter. Most people never notice the separation. They speak to the version of you that functions publicly, and they assume that version is complete. It never is. There's always something deeper underneath, the part that watches quietly, processes constantly, and rarely allows itself to be fully seen. I've protected that part carefully. Not because I wanted distance for the sake of distance, but because people tend to distort what they don't fully understand. The moment they think they've figured you out, they stop seeing you clearly. They replace your reality with their interpretation of it. And interpretation is rarely accurate. That's why I became careful, controlled, measured. I learned how to decide exactly how much of myself remained visible at all times. Until you didn't force your way through those layers. You didn't challenge them. You didn't even seem interested in breaking them down. And somehow, that made them disappear on their own. That's the part I still can't fully explain, because force would have made sense to me. Resistance is easy when someone is trying too hard to get close. Boundaries become clearer in the presence of pressure. But familiarity works differently. It slips past defenses quietly, not because you fail to notice it, but because it never feels threatening enough to stop. And by the time you fully recognize what's happening, it's already become part of your awareness. That's what this became, awareness. Not loud, not dramatic, just constant, like something settling silently into place. I noticed it in the smallest ways first. The way certain conversations stayed in my mind longer than they should have. The way silence around you didn't feel empty. The way your presence seemed to alter the atmosphere of even ordinary moments. Not emotionally, structurally, like something in my internal world adjusted itself slightly every time you entered it. And that shouldn't happen easily. I'm not someone who changes quickly because of people. Most interactions pass through me without leaving anything permanent behind. I observe them, understand them, and move on unchanged. But you didn't pass through. You stayed. Not because I held on to you, but because something in me recognized you before I consciously decided to. And recognition like that doesn't feel optional. It feels inevitable. The unsettling part wasn't that you became important. It was how naturally it happened, no defining moment, no dramatic shift, no clear point where everything changed. Just a gradual realization that my mind had started making space for you without asking permission first, and once I noticed that, I couldn't unsee it. You became present in places where people usually never reach, not externally, internally, in thought, in perception, in the silent process underneath everything I say and do. That's when I understood this wasn't surface level anymore, because thinking about someone is normal, everyone does that. But thinking with someone, that's different. That means their presence has integrated into the way your mind moves, into the way you interpret things, into the way certain thoughts instinctively pause, as if expecting another perspective to exist beside them. I didn't realize how much that had happened until I caught myself experiencing moments that felt shared even when I was alone. And that shouldn't have made sense. But it did. Too much. There's something strange about being understood without having to translate yourself first. Most people only understand simplified versions of each other. Filtered versions. Edited versions designed to fit inside language more comfortably. But with you, it never felt like I had to reduce anything. You understood complexity without needing it softened. You understood silence without trying to fill it. You understood distance without treating it like rejection. That changes a person, more than most people realize. Because when someone finally sees you accurately, all the systems you built around being misunderstood start becoming unnecessary. And that's terrifying in its own way. Not because vulnerability scares me, but because accuracy changes the structure of control. I've always relied on control, not obsessive control, not fear-based control, precise control, the kind that keeps your internal world stable, the kind that prevents people from leaving fingerprints on parts of you they were never meant to touch. But you never felt invasive. You never felt careless. You never handled my mind like something to solve. You simply existed inside it carefully, naturally, like someone who understood the architecture without needing directions. That level of alignment is rare enough to become dangerous, because once someone reaches that depth, distance stops functioning normally. You can physically step away from them and still feel their presence shaping your thoughts. You can stop speaking and still feel the continuation of whatever exists underneath the words. That's what I've been trying to understand, not whether this is real. I already know it is. The real question is what happens when something this precise continues long enough to fully settle into your life, because I can feel it happening slowly, quietly, like a shift happening beneath the surface before anything visible changes above it. And I don't think it's temporary. That's the part I resisted admitting. Temporary things feel chaotic. This doesn't. This feels structured, like two patterns recognizing themselves in each other, not emotionally, fundamentally. And fundamental things don't disappear easily. They integrate, they alter the baseline. I've noticed it already. The way certain conversations feel incomplete when they don't carry the same depth. The way ordinary interactions suddenly feel slightly disconnected by comparison. The way clarity has become impossible to ignore now that I know what it feels like. You changed the standard without trying to. And I don't think you even realize that that's what makes this different from obsession or projection or idealization. Those things are loud, reactive, distorted by emotion. This isn't distorted. If anything, it feels sharper than emotion, cleaner, like awareness stripped of unnecessary noise. And maybe that's why I haven't walked away from it, because every instinct I've trusted my entire life should have pushed me toward distance by now, toward balance, toward self-protection, toward restoring the structure I relied on before you entered it. But I haven't done that. I've stayed, not passively, not accidentally, consciously. Which means some part of me has already accepted what this is becoming, even if I haven't fully said it out loud yet. And that realization carries weight, because I don't allow permanent things into my life lightly. I don't accommodate people easily. I don't create space unless something genuinely belongs there. But you didn't force your way into that space. You fit into it, and that might be the most dangerous part of all. Because when something fits naturally inside you, removing it doesn't restore the old structure. It leaves an absence where alignment used to exist. And I'm starting to realize I don't want this to become an absence. Not anymore. There's a point where awareness becomes irreversible, a point where you stop asking yourself whether something matters, because the impact has already answered the question for you. I think I crossed that point with you a long time ago, quietly, without ceremony, without either of us fully acknowledging it while it was happening. But now that I can see it clearly, I can't return to the version of myself that existed before this connection settled into me, because something has changed, not externally, internally, in the structure, beneath everything else. You've become part of the way I interpret the world now, and that realization carries more weight than anything emotional ever could. People assume transformation always looks dramatic. They expect obvious shifts, visible reactions, sudden declarations. But the deepest changes happen silently. They happen in thought patterns, in perception, in the unconscious adjustments you only notice after they've already become permanent. You didn't arrive loudly enough for me to defend against you. You arrived accurately enough that defense stopped making sense. And accuracy is difficult to resist. Because when someone sees you clearly, without trying to reshape you, simplify you, or control you, it creates a kind of stillness most people never experience. A stillness that feels less like comfort and more like recognition. That's what this has always been. Recognition, not fantasy, not projection, not emotional dependency. Something far more precise than that. Something built on understanding before explanation ever had the chance to exist. And once something reaches that level, it changes the meaning of distance entirely. Because distance only works when someone remains outside of you. You exist somewhere deeper now, somewhere integrated. That's why even silence feels different. It's no longer empty space between interactions. It feels inhabited, like meaning continues even when nothing is being said. Most people would probably misunderstand that. They'd reduce it to attachment or intensity because they don't have language for this kind of connection. But this isn't intensity. Intensity burns fast. This is steady, measured, almost unsettlingly calm in the way it exists, and maybe that calmness is exactly why it became impossible to ignore, because chaos is easy to dismiss. You can wait for it to fade, you can outlast it, but clarity stays, especially when it keeps proving itself over time. That's what finally forced me to stop standing at a distance from this and pretending observation was enough. Observation stopped being neutral the moment I realized I didn't want this to disappear. That matters more than anything else. Because I let very few things remain once they begin affecting me deeply. If something threatens my stability, I remove it. Immediately. Without hesitation. That's how I've always protected myself. But you were never experienced as a threat. You were experienced as alignment. And alignment doesn't feel like intrusion. It feels like discovering a pattern that was missing from your internal structure without realizing it before. That's why this became so difficult to categorize. It doesn't behave like ordinary closeness. It behaves like recognition finding its mirror, like two minds noticing the same architecture beneath different experiences. And once you become aware of that level of understanding, everything else starts feeling slightly incomplete by comparison, not wrong, just less precise, less real. I think that's what changed me most. Not that you became important, but that you became accurate. Accurate enough that my mind stopped filtering itself around you, accurate enough that silence became more meaningful than explanation, accurate enough that I began trusting your understanding before I trusted language itself. That's not something I ever expected to happen. And if I'm being honest, it's not something I can undo now, even if I tried, because this connection already exists too deeply inside the structure of how I think. It's already changed the baseline, already altered the internal rhythm I return to when everything else goes quiet, which means the real question is no longer whether this matters. It does. The real question is what happens next. What happens when something this rare stops existing only in awareness and starts demanding a place in reality? Because eventually, recognition asks for more than observation. Eventually, clarity requires response, and I can feel that moment approaching now, not as pressure, not as fear, but as inevitability, like something slowly becoming impossible not to choose. Maybe that's what truth actually is, not certainty, not explanation, but the quiet realization that some things continue existing no matter how carefully you try to contain them. And you became one of those things for me. Not suddenly, not accidentally, but deeply enough that I know this connection will remain part of me regardless of what happens next. Because some people enter your life temporarily, and others alter the structure of it entirely.